Welcome to CapitolView on WSIU. I'm Brian Sapp. General Assembly's not in session this week, but they did pass a flurry of bills out of committee last week. Among the myriad of bills, they looked into funding and making some changes to Illinois' higher education programs. We'll talk about that. And the efforts of Governor J.B. Pritzker and Chicago Mayor Brenden Johnson resisting some of the Trump administration policies are being used across the country by other communities who are looking to do the same thing. Joining us to talk about these topics and more are John Jackson. He's the visiting professor for the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute, and Brenden Moore. He's a reporter with Capital News Illinois. John and Brenden, welcome to the program. Good to see you.
We're glad to be here.
Good to be with you, Brian.
So we will start off with this past weekend, the No Kings protest. This is the third one across the country to protest some of the changes and moves by the Trump administration. There were protests across the country here in Carbondale. John and I, we saw quite a number of protests here. But John, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about these protests and some maybe context and what impact these could have?
Well, this is a remarkable phenomenon just in itself. I drove up through the one in Carbondale and saw a big crowd. It was estimated by the Southern Illinois in our paper that it was about 1,500 here. And of course, it was huge in the bigger cities. Invisible estimated that Chicago had 250,000. And they also estimated that there were 300 or 3,000 events, and between 8 and 9 million people turned out. So it's become a thing in its own right. But I want to give a larger context to it, and the context is presidential power. Donald Trump is clearly and easily the most powerful president in American history. If Trump wants to start a war with Iran, he can do it. And if he wants to go a month and a couple of days and then call it off and declare victory and go home, he can do that. If he wants to go up to the Supreme Court and sit in on their oral argument, something that's never been done before, and that he's doing now with respect to the birthright citizenship, apparently trying to intimidate the court, I guess, is what he's up to. But the Supreme Court doesn't need the intimidation. They've been going with him on big, important things, most notably the presidential immunity decision. Trump versus the U.S. gave him the right to go out and do almost anything he wants to do. But nevertheless, the Supreme Court has on occasion reined him in a bit, which they did with the tariffs, and which they may do with this birthright citizenship. The appellate courts have been a mixed bag, some for Trump, some against him. District courts have had a lot of district judges going against Trump, but the courts are still a divided kind of outcome. There's no question about the Congress because of the Republican leadership. Congress has abdicated all kinds of powers that they clearly have clearly given up, as in tariffs or as in power to make war. And that on war predates Trump, but he's taken it perhaps to an extreme. This all says that there is some resistance in the typical separation of powers in institutional sense, but the most important resistance is in public opinion and in grassroots democracy. And that's what the No Kings thing is all about, both public opinion and grassroots democracy. But outside the Republican leadership, there has been a lot of Democratic leadership, and Politico had an article just this last Monday where they claimed that Illinois was probably the most prominent state giving opposition consistently to Trump. And they gave credit to the governor and to the mayor of Chicago. And it started with the Operation Midway Blitz, which they pretty effectively fought with ICE, and ultimately both the National Guard and ICE went home and went off and left Chicago, as they have to some extent other big cities. They gave credit to the attorney generals, but our attorney generals in general on the Democratic side have filed opposition appeals or friends of the court or whatever they needed to do. And so that's been an effective source. And a really totally unprecedented source has been coming from Pope Leo, who is an Illinois native and a South Side Chicago guy.
Hmm.
And I think people may have noticed what a steady critic of Trump and his policies he has been. Palm Sunday week, or Palm Sunday, last Sunday, last week, he had a ringing declaration against the Iranian war as a war of choice, as a war that didn't have to be fought. He rejected the idea that violence is a solution to any of these problems. He's also consistently supported the immigrants and has weighed in again and again criticizing Trump over the immigrants and over the treatment of poor and disadvantaged people in general. So, at the mass level and at some parts of the elite level, political leadership, not exclusively because there have been some Republicans in Congress, but very few, but in Congress and in state and local government, there are still some guide rails. And so we're sorting out every day as it unfolds as to whether any of them will have much impact on Donald Trump's behavior.
Definitely, I think we have to. I think looking at the Congress and and looking at if they're the Democrats are going to be able to put up enough of a fight, as we've seen with the shutdown. I think they're trying to use their tools there, and then looking at the local level here. Brenden, as you're there in Springfield, and they are worrying about state issues and things like that. There's still this move to kind of counteract some of the movement by the federal government. What did you see there in Springfield with the No Kings protests in that area?
Pretty similar to what we saw around the country. Obviously, smaller than Chicago, smaller than Minneapolis,
Hmm.
but you still had over 1,000 people that showed up in the capital city. We had one of our reporters out there talking to people, and I think they're really, and John summed it up very well. But there is a response to what many view as backsliding of democracy, perhaps a rise of authoritarianism, at the very least, kind of stretching the bounds of presidential power, so the breakdown of democratic norms. And I think that, as John said, the president, perhaps the one thing that could constrain him is public opinion. He is not popular for, I mean, now a host of reasons. The tariffs were not popular. This war with Iran is not popular. His policies on immigration are not popular. At the very least, the heavy-handed tactics that we saw here in Illinois and the Chicago region with Midway Blitz, and I think and folks downstate, I think sometimes. I don't know have a full appreciation of just how impactful that was in the Chicago area, just how not just in the city but in the suburbs, just how resented a lot of those tactics were and how unpopular they were. And we've seen legislators here in the Capitol try to respond to some of that. Last year they passed a measure that would grant a private right of action for citizens and folks who believe that their constitutional rights were violated by federal immigration agents. That would create a 1,500-foot barrier around courthouses, preventing arrests at state courthouses. Yeah, and that's been challenged by the federal government, as you would expect. And then last week, in the House Executive Committee, House Speaker Chris Welch advanced a bill that would essentially bar federal immigration enforcement from building these ICE detention centers in
Mhm.
communities, anywhere close to, a school, a park, homes. And that'll probably, if it passes and goes to the governor's desk, would probably get challenged too. But it just shows that there is kind of this a movement to resist some of the excesses of the federal government in Trump 2.0. And as John mentioned, I mean, Illinois really kind of helped write the Trump resistance playbook, at least when it came to immigration. The governor's talked about it a lot about, one, take out your phone, record everything, every interaction with ICE agents, because that'll help us in court. And it has helped them in court. They've won a lot of cases because, the judges looked at the evidence and said, to the federal government, what you're telling me is not what I see in this video. It just doesn't match the
Mhm.
reality on the ground. And so you kind of see that multi-pronged approach of resistance in the streets, peaceful protest, and then the legal avenue. The Attorney General's been very involved in a lot of these cases as well. I believe last year he was party to, I believe, about 52 lawsuits against the Trump administration. And then we're starting to see some of this legislative response from state governments in blue states, obviously because we haven't seen a lot of pushback from Republicans that control Congress, and even the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court has pushed back on the president a little bit, but not
Mhm.
not much. So really, you're seeing that a lot of the resistance is coming from the grassroots. It's coming from state legislatures. It's coming from big blue cities. Mayor Johnson and others around the country. So yeah, I think we can't really overstate the significance of the No Kings. I think one thing that we should note though is that it's a much older crowd for the most
Mhm.
part. I mean, I think more young people are starting to come out, but I'll be interested to see, especially because that was a demographic. Younger people kind of moved to the president in the last election. Are they still with him, or are they shifting back, or do they show up in November? But at the very least, though, I mean, it shows that the president is probably in some political trouble.
Mhm.
In November, it's not looking good for his party. I mean, they have a money advantage over Democrats, but in terms of the movement on the ground, it's looking like it's going to be a pretty good year for Democrats at the ballot box.
And I think we'll leave it there so we can move on to some other topics. But I think as we start heading into summer, getting closer to those midterms, I think we might see. I wonder if we'll see any changes in the Trump administration, but we'll have to see what happens there. Moving on, I wanted to stay with the legislature and talk with you a little bit, Brenden, sorry. The plenty of bills passed out of committee last week. You wrote a story kind of wrapping up where we are with the Bears, with so many things it seems. But I think that this is a big monetary impact on the state, and there's a bit more of a timeline here with Indiana kind of has their bill or their proposal out there, and we're waiting to see what Illinois does. Can you kind of give us an update of where we are on this?
Yeah, so legislators this week are on their spring break. The House will be back next week, and the Senate the week after. They did not consider a bill. The House didn't consider a bill that would basically allow for the Bears and really any large company willing to invest a certain amount to negotiate a payment in lieu of taxes with local taxing bodies. This is that what the Bears would call property tax certainty. They want to know what their bill is going to be for the next 30 years or so if they do build a new dome stadium at the property they own in Arlington Heights. There's been a lot of pushback among Democrats, especially Chicago Democrats, progressive Democrats, who are concerned about obviously the Bears leaving Soldier Field and what happens to Chicago. How is Chicago made whole? What does the city get? But then also they're concerned about how this economic development tool would be deployed in other places because it's not just a Bears bill. I mean, this could, you can, have a company that wants to build something in Carbondale and they then would negotiate with the local taxing bodies. This bill would be a weighted vote, so the school boards would have an outsized influence, and there's a lot of concern about do we really want to give, a school board's representative as much that much power to make a big decision for a community that's kind of an impact for decades. So there's a lot of stuff that has to be worked out, not to mention the infrastructure piece of it, which there's been more support for, but the Bears definition of infrastructure is a little bit more expansive than the state's. So the devil's kind of in the details there. I spoke last week with a couple of the sponsors in the House. So Representative Cam Buckner from Chicago, and he said that the Bears haven't given them a set deadline. That there was some concern that the Bears wouldn't wait till the end of the spring session. And he doesn't think it'll take that long. But then Kevin Warren earlier this week, it's the NFL owners meetings this week in Phoenix, and he told NBC Sports that. Yeah, we haven't given the Bears a set deadline, and that we're hoping to have a decision though in spring or early summer, and which would basically put it right in line with the end of the spring legislative session, May 31st. So I would expect, again, we'll know something in the next, 4 to 6 weeks, 4 to 8 weeks. They have a lot of work to do to get this across the finish line. Again, like I think there's a lot of moving parts. Like the pilot bill probably doesn't move until there's some kind of agreement on Chicago. There were Cranes had a story earlier this week about the Chicago Park District wants $630 million to renovate Soldier Field. Perhaps that's a piece of that. So to be determined. I feel like we're talking about the Bears every week, but it is a huge thing. Obviously, with Indiana hanging out there too, that is still an option on the table. But I think at least the fact that it's been kind of quiet the past few weeks after kind of the hysteria in late February, like, oh my gosh, the Bears are going to move to Indiana after Indiana passed their bill. Well, it's been kind of quiet the past few weeks, which I think is a good sign that they're talking behind the scenes and that the Bears, at least reading between the lines, it seems like they want to be in Arlington Heights. They want to get this done. It's just a matter of how do you get 60 votes in the House, especially, and then obviously 30 in the Senate. 'Cause that's a tricky thing, especially when you have so many Chicago legislators. They have enough collectively, especially under Speaker Chris Welch's unofficial rule of you need 60 Democrats for a vote to be called. So that is the big number. And again, that's going to be a challenge. But if the governor, who is really backing this pilot concept, really, twist some arms and perhaps you get organized labor involved because again, these big mega projects would be huge for construction, and so I think they can get it done, but it remains to be seen. It'll be a very fascinating thing to watch as they wind down their session in the next couple of months.
And you're right, and I think we'll wrap it up there. It was hot and heavy, lots of talk, and especially I don't think Kevin Warren didn't really seem to do himself for the Bears much when he put out that one-sided statement, and so things have seemed to kind of cool down, and looks like negotiations are happening. So I think we'll just kind of wait for most of the bills and let the deal making happen. We've got a little bit over 6 minutes. Wanted to finish on our last topic, talk about higher education. John, we'll flip to you. The the General Assembly is looking at some funding mechanisms, increasing funding for higher ed, and then also some talk about allowing community colleges to provide more four-year bachelor's degrees. I wanted to talk with you. You've done a lot of study on this. Can you kind of lay out where higher education is in the state of Illinois, what we should be looking at?
Well, the perennial questions are how to fund higher ed adequately, and then how to distribute it across the institutions, the universities, and the community colleges. This new bill for higher education will really adopt, in broad outline, the K through 12 model that's already been in place for 4 or 5 years. And that is, how do you define what is an adequate base per pupil expenditure, and then how to distribute that base and ensure that everybody at least meets that adequate base definition. And getting to that is an enormously complicated question. But let me just give you some history. I came here in 1969, and at that time, which is a long time ago, but it is really pretty much true still today, about 70% of, or a little above 70%, 72, 73% of what we were getting for our called the general fund money, it was about 70 to 72% provided by the state. And that left all other sources, most notably tuition and fees, to fill up the rest of that. The last time I checked, it was around 30 that we were getting from the state. And what's happened? Well, it's often called the defunding of higher education, which certainly reached an extreme in Rauner when we got really clobbered and still trying to get over that. But the answer for many years, and probably mostly still answer on the distribution across institutions, was that the University of Illinois system got the first 50%. We at SIU system got the second largest amount. That probably reflected their research and our research base more than anything else. Political clout would be a part of that too. Mm-hmm. But little known is the whole idea of research institutions, and there are only 5 total Research One institutions: University of Illinois Champaign, University of Illinois Chicago, and SIU Carbondale are the only 3 publics. We're joined by Northwestern and the University of Chicago. And our role is especially recognized because we have a med school, a law school, pharmacy, nursing, and U of I has comparable and much bigger research than all of it. But that will help U of I, and it'll help SIU both, because that research mission is accounted for in the formula. But don't count out the regionals. The regionals have a very important, very special commitment to educating, mostly, not entirely, but they educate very heavily those students who are disadvantaged, those students who are first generation. And that is also recognized. The emphasis in this bill is on the equity to the unserved needs, and that will help us and the regionals. So we all have some strong programs. We have programs that we've been good at, and this bill recognizes that by saying that we're interested in maintaining those strong programs and building on them. And we're not really very interested right now in new programs. Mm-hmm. The bill contains 1% increase. I think it was 3 last year. So that's an outcome that universities and community colleges won't be happy with. The community colleges wanting 4-year degrees is also perennial. They worked out, as a result of last year's bill that didn't pass, what I think is a very good compromise, and that is the compromise provides that it'll be a short list that each community college will get, and that list has to be focused and especially focused on jobs and on what community colleges do best of all, those vocational courses.
And that's I think a theme. Just had some connection. My wife's a teacher, and I've had some connection with education at the secondary level, not post-secondary, but yeah, those career type courses seem to be popular. A lot of talk here, even at Southern, with those courses in addition. So I guess we'll have to see what the legislature can get to through the rest of the session. As you said, we'll pick up next week after this break. John and Brenden, thank you for joining us. Good talking to you guys.
Glad to do it.
Good talking, Brian.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us this week on this week's edition of Capitol View. On behalf of John Jackson and Brenden Moore, I'm Brian Sapp. Have a great evening, and we'll see you next week.